Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You are listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Jason Bay. Jason is a co-founder and chief revenue officer at Blissful Prospecting. Blissful Prospecting does just exactly that. They help B2B sales teams, small businesses, and nonprofits remove the stress from prospecting. So what does that mean? Think about if you're out there, you're doing outreach to your target market. How stressful is it when you're trying to figure out how exactly do I write these emails? How exactly do I phrase my cold calls? Should I be doing videos even for my cold outbounds? How do I do all that stuff? It feels really, really stressful. Well, that's exactly the problem that they solve. So Jason and his co-founder, Sarah, have developed what they call the reply method. And that's what we're going to dig into in today's podcast. We're going to talk about their approach to helping the companies that they serve to reduce that stress by implementing the reply method for prospecting. Jason and Sarah have worked with companies all over the world. A couple of their examples of where they've been able to help their customers, some of their clients, some of their customers have, as a result of working with them, gotten meetings and clients at places like REI, Gap, Thomson Reuters, Victoria's Secret, Moon Juice. Plenty of really, really large companies have become customers of their clients as a result of Blissful Prospecting and the reply method. So you definitely want to listen to the rest of the episode to check that out. A couple of the key topics that we talked about with Jason, I just got off my conversation with him, so I've got my notes here right in front of me. Number one, we talked about the importance of having a process to reduce stress. We talked about improv and comedy. Jason does some improv and stand-up comedy. So does his wife. And we talked about the importance and how we can use the lessons from improv and stand-up comedy to selling. We dug in deep to the reply method and how it really can become the foundation of all of your sales messaging. We talked about customer interviews and how infrequently both he and I have seen our clients go back to their current customers to get information, to get verbiage, to get vernacular about how they describe the problem that they're solving every single day. So we dug deep into the importance and how to do those customer interviews. We talked about the importance of running your outbound cadence manually before you try to automate it. One of the biggest challenges that we have right now is that there are literally thousands of sales and marketing apps all in our tech stack designed to automate things. Well, that's really great because it helps with efficiency, but it's also really terrible because it takes away the human approach of sending out the right message that falls along and meets this criteria around the reply method. We talked about being human. We talked about the importance of bucketing and segmenting your prospects and why you should not treat all of your prospects equally. And then we also spent quite a bit of time on video and some of the expertise and results that Jason has been getting himself at Blissful Prospecting, as well as results that his clients have been getting by using video effectively. And we talked about a couple of really specific strategies around how to use video as part of your prospecting plan of action. So lots of really great topics. I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Jason, it's really fun to work and talk to a person like Jason because, he's out there every day working with companies, B2B companies, small companies trying to go after really large Fortune 500s. And, he's doing this outbound prospecting and he's got his Blissful Prospecting company and he's talking about the reply method. And then when you talk to a guy like Jason, he's just very reserved and very soft-spoken. And he even called himself an introvert. And I think just that alone is a really great lesson that you don't have to be this big extroverted personality in order to be successful in sales. And I know a lot of people listening to this podcast, you're a founder of a company, maybe you come from a technical background and you're just not used to following kind of a traditional sales process. And it feels like you feel like, well, I'm supposed to be extroverted or I'm supposed to be outgoing. I'm supposed to be a certain type of personality if I'm out there selling. And you really don't. You just need to be yourself. And I think Jason's a really great example of that, who is a person who just really knows his stuff well. He's got a really great process and he does really well with his company at Blissful Prospecting. So on top of all of the great content that we covered and all the great topics, I just wanted to point that out because I think it's important that we think about, the challenges that you have and breaking some of those misconceptions that you might have about what it takes to be successful in sales. So that's it for now. Let's head over to my conversation with Jason Bay. Jason, welcome to the show.
Scott, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. I know people that are listening, they can't see us, but you're all set up. You got a nice microphone, headphones. You're, it looks like a little bit of a studio there.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of looks like that, I guess. I'm just sitting in a home office with the dog chilling right next to me underneath.
Dude, you could have played it off. You're like, oh man, we have this massive production studio. But you're sitting there with the dog. That sounds cool too. That's a good visual. What kind of dog do you have?
So his name's Pepe. He's a toy poodle. Yeah, we use him. We definitely use him in our cold outreach. But he's a year and a half, almost old now. So he's definitely in the puppy stages. So
okay.
He gets kind of lonely when he's not hanging out right next to us. He'll start chewing on stuff if you don't got something for him to chew, that sort of stuff.
Okay. So if we start hearing Pepe start chewing on the table or jump up on the table and start chewing, if people hear weird noises, then they're going to know it's Pepe chewing on the microphone. That's cool, man. Oh, I love that. So, we definitely want to talk about outreach, which is the reason that we've got you here on the show. So one place just to quickly start to give some context, I've already done a bit of an introduction about you and your company at Blissful Prospecting, but I always love to hear from people directly. So you meet somebody new and say, hey, Jason, what do you do? How do you describe what you do and the problem that you solve?
I'd say, hey, a lot of, if you're in sales and doing outreach and responsible for filling your pipeline, a lot of challenges come with that, right? You might be doing a lot of networking and referrals, and that's getting you some business. And what we hear a lot of times is, well, hey, what about that company I don't have a personal connection with? How do I get in touch with them? And a lot of times the challenges associated with that are, well, I send them an email and they don't respond, or I'm scared of making a cold call because I don't know what to say. And where we want to come in is really reduce the stress around prospecting by giving you a process, because I think that's really what it's all about. As a salesperson myself, is if I'm confident in the process and I have a process and I know what I'm going to say and can prepare and bring something to the prospect, that's going to make me feel a lot better doing that call. So that's where we want to help reps and sales teams, is by giving them that process, giving them something that they can use and actually add value to a prospect that may or may not know about their company.
Cool. Love that. And we're definitely going to dig into that. I had two somewhat personal questions before we do it. You dive into that, because
sure.
I read a couple interesting things about your background. So one, it looks like you're from Oregon. You went to Oregon State. You were in Portland for a while. Now you're in Austin, Texas.
Yep. Yeah, we just moved to Austin about a year and a half ago from Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, I was curious because we just had Leah Cheney, who is on the podcast, our most recent guest. She was actually living in Austin and she just moved to Portland.
Oh.
So I was curious if there's any particular reason for the move to Austin, and how do you find the city there as compared to Portland and some of the other tech hubs out there?
Yeah, the big thing, because Sarah, my wife, and I, we run Blissful Prospecting together, and we run our company fully remote. So we were I grew up in Oregon, and I was just like, hey, are there other places that we can live? And hey, there's this, state income tax type of thing that we deal with in Oregon. Are there other states maybe where we don't have to deal with that? And we didn't want to live in Vegas, didn't want to live in Florida. So that was Austin, a big part of coming to Texas. The other part was that I visited Austin too. And it's just a really cool community here of people. And this is like the easiest place in the world to make friends. The Southern hospitality thing is definitely real in my experience. And I always tell people, if you can't make friends here, there's something wrong with you. The people here are just so friendly. Yeah, so that was a big thing. But Portland and Austin are very similar. I would just say, not to get too political, people in Portland are just a little more sensitive with stuff sometimes, in my experience. Mm-hmm. And Austin, they're not quite as much like that.
Blue state, blue state versus red state. It's left leaning versus right leaning. So. Yeah, but Austin is in my experience, it's much more liberal.
Oh, very
city,
blue.
compared to the rest of Texas.
That was a big part of it too. Like I said, without getting too political, that was a big part of it in Austin too.
Cool. No, that's cool. The second thing I wanted to ask you about, which I'm personally insanely curious about, you do stand-up comedy.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been some months since I've done a set, but I started doing that in 2016, and I actually started doing improv before that. So I wanted to do stand-up comedy for a while, and just was too scared to do it because it's just you up there by yourself on stage, right?
Yeah.
And I'd done a lot of public speaking, so it wasn't a fear of public speaking. It's just, what do you do stand up? The only form of approval there is if people are laughing or not. You could do an hour-long presentation, and if people aren't laughing, you're not like feeling completely terrible about yourself. But yeah, and then I got, Sarah, my wife, into it as well, and she's just so much funnier than I am. But before she did her first open mic, I was like, because I recorded all of them so I could listen back and improve. And I played her a recording of my first set, and it was 3 minutes long. Applause at the beginning, literally no laughs the entire set, and then applause at the end. I was like, hey, it's just part of the deal.
Yeah.
It definitely toughened me out.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked about that, I mean, I've taken an improv class as well. And I did it because I was also curious about comedy. I've thought about doing stand-up comedy. I've written tons of notes in an Evernote file over the years.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I will do at some point when I make the time to go start, doing the open mic stuff. More so, I think, relates to sales. You're like, okay, I'm up there on stage all by myself, and you're looking for applause and laughs. But it feels a lot like that. And I just got off a call with a client this morning who literally flew from London to Milan, walked into a room full of people, didn't quite know what they were getting into when they were invited to come do the meeting. And now all of a sudden it's sort of like improv central. You got to like figure out, I've got 2 hours now all of a sudden with this room full of people. What am I going to do? And I think there's a lot of really good skills that carry over from improv that we can use in comedy, or that we can use in sales.
Oh, absolutely. Like with improv, the getting outside of your head and just being in the moment, because I'm naturally introverted and I think way too much about what I'm going to say versus just being in the moment and reacting, right? And being present with that person, I think is really good. And then you sort of get over the fear of saying something and not being confident whether or not people are going to laugh, because you can't really do that in improv. You just kind of have to go with it. The humor is really in the reaction, not the canned, rehearsed sort of thing. And then stand-up comedy is kind of the opposite. You don't really do a lot of improv. At least most people don't when they're doing stand-up. So yeah, they're definitely both really applicable to sales for sure.
Yeah. So I always encourage people that if you're especially if like a startup founder that's more technical, you've never really done sales, and you're just uncomfortable with doing sales, then taking an improv class, I think, can really help just to get you in that situation where, like you said, if you're introverted, it forces you, like by design, improv is like focusing on the external, focusing on other people, being present in the moment, and not trying to script what am I going to say next, because that's actually counter to what improv is all about. So I just wanted to ask you about that because I know you've done some comedy, and I think it's a good lesson from your personal life on how we can use those types of opportunities to improve our sales skills.
Oh, definitely. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about selling. Let's talk about the fun world of cold outreach. So I think maybe as like a baseline of the conversation, we can talk about, you start with the reply method that you and Sarah teach. Like, how do you describe the reply method? And maybe even as importantly as what is the method, how did you arrive at it? Like, what's the background that got you to create this model, to create this process called the reply method?
The way that I would describe it is, if you're into fitness, which I've recently gotten into just because Sarah, she's from New York, she called out the fact I had some love handles going on, and she's like, hey dude, you got to figure this out. But when you look at fitness, I started looking at, well, hey, online, who has pictures of the type of body that I would like? And you start thinking about, well, at least when I was looking, I was like, well, they probably all have the same kind of diet, right? They probably really, because these people are shredded, they're slim, they have the type of thing that I'm looking for. And I was thinking, hey, they probably eat high protein, low carb, that sort of thing. And the thing that I found that was uncommon about them was the diet that they ate. You'd see vegans that would look like this. You'd see people eat keto, Whole30, that sort of thing. But what they had in common was a foundation of things that they do that all sort of healthy lifestyles incorporate. Exercise, like calorie regulation, maybe not quite restriction, but regulating your calories, making sure to get sleep, drinking water. And then it was consistently doing those habits over time. And then I thought about, well, hey, like with sales, you look at all these sales methodologies and I love all of them. I love Challenger. I love Sandler. But when you look at the methodologies, they're kind of like diets. They're just a different way of getting to the same result. Because if I showed you a picture of 50 random reps that are crushing quotas, I bet what you would not find in common is the methodology that they use. So when we thought about the reply method, we're like, well, instead of like, because I feel like people are looking for prescriptive ways of fixing their problems and they want the template, right? They want to know exactly what to say in a cold call. And it's just not about that because you're dealing with humans, right? And people can detect templates, from a mile away. So when we started looking at the reply method, it was like, well, what are the foundations of good sales messaging? And I started looking at patterns in how we come up with messaging for people. And now we, come up with the messaging so that they can use it. But what we used to do a lot of was do the prospecting for them. So I started looking at what are those components, and the components were, and it sort of fit. I didn't really have to actually work that hard to make it fit the acronym, which was kind of cool. But what we found is that all of they have in common is they focus on a result. So the messaging, whether cold call, your pitch, through a cold email, it focuses on getting the prospect's attention because people automatically are like, hey, what's in this for me? That's what everyone wants to know. And we're trying to flip that and get them to think, hey, this looks interesting. And what we can do here, Scott, I don't know, do you want to go through each individually or do you kind of want me to give a summary of each before we dig in?
Let's do the definition of reply with R being the first, being result. Let's go through the other four and then we can go back up to the top
Sure.
and kind of dig into each.
Absolutely. So what I saw in common here, and this is all from a prospect's point of view, like what prospects need to see, not what we need to do as salespeople necessarily. So the results piece was, hey, I'm seeing a lot of outreach that's missing, talking about what you can actually do for the person without using all this crazy language, and then a lack of social proof, right? People always say, I work with Google, Amazon, all this stuff, and it's like, if that's not relevant to the person, like it doesn't matter, like dropping that social proof. The second part that I noticed is that the people that tend to lead with empathy, so the E stands for empathy, is you can really show someone that instead of going from, hey, you're not one of us, you kind of go into, hey, you're speaking my language. You need to show prospects that you're speaking their language. And then the way you kind of tie those two together is through personalization, which is the P. And there's so many reps sending stuff that's not personalized, but really you need to show that you're not a spammer and that your outreach to this person was intentional. So the personalization component, we noticed a lot that, hey, you got to have this and it can't just be some random fact about the person. It's got to connect in some sort of way. And then the L is for laser focus, with attention spans being what they are these days. Emails, in our experience, need to be under 120 words, 3 to 5 sentences. Your cold call pitch needs to be under 30 seconds. You need to get to the point. If you're going to send a personalized video, it's got to be 60 seconds, 90 seconds. And then the Y was for you. So a lot of the outreach that I've seen that doesn't work is when it makes the product or the service the hero instead of making the prospect the hero. And you really want to make it about how the prospect can value and benefit from what you're doing and make them Batman instead of Alfred. Your solution or your product is Alfred, and everyone wants to be Batman. They want to be the superhero. So if you could put things in their best interest, that kind of ties everything together.
Yeah, I love this. It's obviously easy to remember with reply and the rationale that you've come through with this. The last piece first, and then we'll come back up to the top of the result. You mentioned about hero. A couple episodes ago, we had a woman named Susan Lindner on the show, and she is a master storyteller. That's what she does. So just like you focus on prospecting, her job, her company agency focuses on helping companies tell a story. And we talked a lot about the hero's journey and how your prospect sees themselves in the middle of this journey every day. They're struggling through internal meetings and trying to do their own job and trying to hit their own numbers. And the more we can make it about them, and the empathy piece being understanding that they're on this journey and that things are hard. And it's almost like, we all walk into the office every day with our sword looking for the dragons that we have to slay that day.
Yep.
And so I can't overemphasize the importance of that. So I want to talk more about it in a minute. So on the result piece, so you use the what's in it for me. Let's dive more into that. So give me a good example, and then give me maybe a bad example of the way that you've seen, clients that you've coached on, improving their outreach. And whether it's maybe a cold call, it could be a cold call on phone, it could be video, it could be email. What's an example of being really precise around this kind of result that does help the prospect understand what's in it for them?
Yeah. So I'll start with a bad example and then maybe contrast that with what you're talking about here.
Okay.
What I hear a lot, like so let's say, Scott, that you are a VP of sales at some sort of you sell a professional service of some sort, right? Could be insurance, could be some sort of consulting. Let's say it's consulting. So if I send an email that says, hey, Scott, we're actually one of the best solutions for people that are looking to increase their pipeline. And we've worked with companies like Amazon and Google, and we have some really good case studies. We can help them increase their pipeline per rep by 25%. To me, that's like a result that's just all about myself and like what I'm doing. And the result is sharing companies that you don't relate with. You are a VP of sales and sell professional services and do consulting, and Amazon and Google are not really good examples of companies that relate with that. So instead of going in and sharing something that's not relevant, I would want to be much more concise and say something like, well, hey, let me look through our portfolio first and do some segmentation. And if I'm going to reach out to a VP of sales at a professional services firm, I want to share an example of a company that is a professional services firm. So one of the things that we could do is look at, well, hey, what companies are relevant that we can do social proof, and then what result is a VP of sales maybe looking for? So a better example of this would be, and I would start with empathy prior to this in an email. So I would say, hey, Scott, not sure if you're dealing with this right now, but what I've been hearing from a lot of VPs of sales is that the sales floor is a lot quieter than they like it to be. Their reps are sending outreach and they're just not quite getting the response rates that they like. Like I said, wasn't sure if that's something you're dealing with, but we've helped company A and B that are other professional services firms sort of navigate through these challenges and increase their response rates so that the reps can spend more time in front of clients and selling. And then we could talk about what that call to action and stuff might sound like, but that's the difference between the two.
Yeah, and this is an important point that I wanted to make sure to emphasize here, because we talked at the top about process and people looking for, like, you want to give people a process, which is important, and you want to give them the foundations of sales messaging. But I think too often people, like you said, looking for some kind of like template or prescription on exactly like, what should I say? How should I say it? What you just said was like, well, I would start with empathy. So when we talk about reply as a methodology, it doesn't mean that in the email, you start with results and then do empathy and then do personalization and then do laser focus and then make it about that, about you. It's actually these are all ingredients that you're mixing together in an email or in an outreach of some kind. And it's not like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. So the fact that you started with empathy, I think, is an important point.
Yeah, I can give you another really concrete example, because so we work with professional services companies and companies that sell tech, but also nonprofits. So empathy is so much more important with a nonprofit that has a business development component where they want to do partnerships, because they don't use the same, like they don't really say revenue. They say fundraising and they say impact. So like the way, like if you were a VP of corporate development and you were heading up a department of development reps that are going out and doing this type of thing, like I'd say, hey, Scott, not sure if you're dealing with this challenge right now, but sometimes what I hear from development teams is that they're so busy handling their existing corporate partnerships that they don't have time to go searching for new partnerships. Wasn't sure if that's something you're dealing with right now, but we're working with another nonprofit, this one, and we help connect them with these types of companies. Here's a case study. Like that's how I would segue. That's exactly what it would sound like, almost exactly what it would sound like in a cold call when I'm giving the pitch, and what an email would sound like. But it's very sticky, very tangible with that challenge. Like it can't just be like, hey, they tell us they're having challenges connecting with corporate partners. It's got to be very specific, situational, and you get that from having lots of conversations, with your prospects and keeping note of what those challenges are.
All right, we are off and running in my conversation with Jason Day. One of the things I want to share with you is something I'm really, really excited about, and that is my new book. And that name of that book is called Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. I think that tells you pretty much everything you need to know. One of the challenges that I've seen working at startups and working with startups as a sales coach is that, hustle doesn't scale. Like hustle is table stakes. We're told over and over and over, you got to hustle to be successful. And sure, you do have to hustle, but there's a point where hustle will just wear you out and you have to get some repeatability and then scalability in your sales process. And that's why I wrote this book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling, because in the book, I cover and discuss and go deep into what I call the Q framework. The Q framework is a framework that you can use for every sales opportunity, and you can use it as the foundation for building your sales process at your startup. And this will help you to get repeatability and scalability in your startup. So I'd love to get you a copy of that book, Stop Hustling, Start Scaling. The easiest way to do that is to go over to SalesQualia, QUALIA.com. And when you go to salesqualia.com, right there on the homepage, you'll see there's a cover of the book and then a button that says Start Reading Now. You can download the entire book, an entire PDF of the book, absolutely free, over to you, because I want to get this book out to as many people as possible. So much so that I'm willing to give the book away for free. So that's it. That's my offer to you. If you're in a situation where you're at a point with your startup where you need to get some more repeatability and scalability in your sales process, then I think you're really, really going to find this book useful. So that's it for now. Let's head it back over to my conversation with Jason Bay. The language piece, I think, is really important, or thinking maybe not just necessarily the language, but more specifically the vernacular of whoever you're calling on. Like you said, with nonprofits, they think in terms of fundraising and impact. And I think if you just instead talk about revenue, then clearly there's no connection there. Somebody would see the word revenue, and immediately if I send an email out to somebody that's head of fundraising at a nonprofit, and I didn't mention fundraising or impact or even dollars, if instead I use the word revenue, immediately they would know, well, they're not talking to me. Yep. It's also related to the personalization piece. Using your consulting service example a moment ago, like if you use the word customers versus clients, like many professional services, they use terminology and they talk about their customers. They actually use the term client instead of customer. Yep. And so those are little nuances that when it comes to both personalization and empathy, I think there's opportunities to really improve the wording that goes out to make sure that people know that they know that you're talking to them directly, not a bunch of people that happen to be on a list.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening and you're wondering, well, how do I find out what that language is? There's a lot of different ways to do it, but one of the things I don't see a lot of sales teams do is actually interview customers and asking them, hey, before you started working with us, what kind of challenges were you having? And how do you talk about those challenges? How is that affecting your job? What did you think the solutions were? How did you go about finding a solution? Why did you end up going with something like that? Like you get all that like language, and it's so valuable. We learn so many things that we just didn't think was the case. And we make that a requirement. Like any client we work with now, if we're going to be writing messaging for you, you have to let us interview your customers. Otherwise, we're going to be guessing because we haven't done their job before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's ironic that you mentioned this, because this is one of the key projects that we also require our new clients to undertake, and that's if they're like learning and defining their sales process and how to sell and what the value propositions are. We also tell them and give them a project to go do those customer interviews, because there's a couple things that sort of magically happen after you've had a customer for a period of time, and they've now been paying you money and they're trusting you and you're getting them results. You get a whole different layer and level of information from those customers, because at the time they bought from you, they might tell you these are the reasons we're going to buy from you, but then there might be a whole bunch of other reasons behind the wall that they're not sharing with you, or it may just be evolution of how you're servicing them, that they bought for you for one reason, but after 4 months or 6 months, 12 months of working with you, there's all these other reasons why they continue to work with you. So the reason you keep them as a customer may not be the same reason that you got them in the first place. So going and getting that, like you said, those interviews and the vernacular is really critical. And in fact, we found that it's best to record those So even if you're in person with someone or on Zoom, make sure you're recording, because they're going to use certain words that if you only just, because if I'm interviewing you, you might tell me something, and by the time it goes through my ear, through my brain, and ends up my pen onto my paper, I might change the words to make them more of my words as opposed to exactly what you said.
Yep.
And so recording those and playing those back, or even just sending surveys like type forms and saying, hey, would you mind filling out a few questions? Because they'll use their words specifically.
Yeah, this is, I mean, that's just awesome stuff. Yep.
Yeah, I was curious if you can think of a really specific example of one of your clients recently or in the past that
we
you had to do this exercise. They were probably like, I don't want to do that. That's stupid. Can't you just tell me how to write emails? You're like, well, first do your homework. I'd love to hear a specific example about that.
Yeah. So we just started working with a guy that does like IT security consulting. And one of the things that he really specializes in, he works with these really, really large companies that do consulting around Microsoft Cloud and Office 365 and security associated with that, and this stuff called Azure and MIM and all these other complicated technologies. Now, when we met with our client, he said something around, well, hey, a lot of like what these people, the reason why they hire me and the challenges they're having is because, they either don't have someone on staff with that skill set, or what they're looking for is, the person on staff is too busy. And we're like, okay, cool. Like on the surface level, that sounds like a good way for us to start, working up some sales messaging. Now, when we interviewed his top client, she not only shared that, but she went so much deeper. She gave situational context into the challenge and said, actually, like what I'm doing is like, I'm looking at our own resource pipeline. And when I really start to freak out is when I'm looking a month or two ahead and I see that we don't have someone that has this specific knowledge and skill set, because it takes 3 to 4 weeks for us to approve a new vendor. So if something happens tomorrow and I don't have someone on staff, I'm freaking out because we might be losing money. And she just had all of this like awesome stuff. And now like the way that I would do a cold call for that, instead of doing, well, hey, sometimes what we hear, resource managers have challenges with is they don't have staff for this. And it's like, blah, blah, blah. Instead of be like, hey, Scott, I don't know if you deal with this, but sometimes what I hear from resource managers is that they're looking a month or two ahead in their delivery pipeline. And if you're like some of the clients you work with, you want to make sure you have a backup for particular skill sets like MIM and Azure. Now, you're probably doing a pretty good job with that, but I was just calling to see if that's something you might be thinking about or open to having a conversation around how we might be able to support you in that area. That's a completely different conversation with someone than to be like really base level. Hey, you probably need more leads, or hey, your conversion rates, I bet you wish were higher. Well, it's like, no duh, right? Everyone wants that. But when you can get situational with it and bring up something very specific that only someone that would know about their job would do, that stuff's gold. And if nothing else, people are going to feel, at least, even if it's not a challenge they're having right now, a lot of times the response is, hey, honestly, it's not a challenge we're having right now. And you can actually have a dialogue about it versus them just trying to brush you off.
Yeah, you immediately build the trust with that empathy. And I might be even tempted to use the term freak out. Like, hey, I don't know if you're anything like our clients, but you're looking a month or two ahead and maybe you're having potentially a freak out moment here.
Yeah.
If you don't get somebody filled. But yeah, it's like, it's exact. See, that's the interesting part about doing these interviews, like we were talking about, and creating the empathy, because it's on the surface, it's the same message. It's the same problem that we're solving. There's nothing about, we haven't identified some new problem that they haven't told us about, but it's because we're using their wording and we're getting really specific about these timelines. Like, hey, I bet you're looking a month or two ahead, and it might take you 3 or 4 weeks to find somebody, and you might be potentially in freak out mode if you don't get this filled. It's the same message, but different words that helps you connect. And then it helps that person say like, oh, wow, this person that's calling me actually really understands my business.
And tone is so important too. And tone comes out in your writing. And then also, I just like approaching things from a very non-assumptive standpoint, where a lot of people reach out and they assume that the prospect has a challenge. And it's almost offensive when someone reaches out to you about something you should be in charge of and doing a good job with and take a lot of pride in, and they tell you that you're probably having challenges with this. I'm like, because I have people reach out to us about lead generation, and I'm like, okay, we're not doing like marketing style stuff, but we are doing prospecting. So you say we're having a challenge finding clients. I'm just like, no, we got it, dude. But he said, hey, not sure, you guys are doing a lot of prospect. It looks like you do that really well. Not sure if you've thought about how you could do a podcast or whatever other stuff if you're looking to, get some more leads and keep your pipeline full. Not sure if you're having challenges. Yeah, it's like that tone and that I'm not sure, but this is what I hear a lot of people, like you say, people are just so much more receptive to that.
Yeah, I noticed that in a couple of the examples where you specifically almost pulled back the proposition. You're like, maybe this doesn't relate to you. Maybe it's not an issue for you. And I feel like doing that almost disarms the obvious wall that somebody's going to put up. Because if I'm just calling you about like, hey, we help these companies with these problems, like you said, you're assuming they have it. But if you turn around and say, look, maybe you don't have this problem, maybe you got it all covered. If you do, awesome. But if not, we might be able to help you out. Then it removes that objection that somebody's going to have to the call in the first place, because you're pulling that objection away from them before they have a chance to use it.
Yep. And Ian Altman, Same Side Selling, he wrote a book called Same Side Selling. He talks about disarming the prospect. And that's just such an effective tactic for selling and prospecting.
Yeah. And it's all, like you said, a lot more human of an interaction. Use that word before. I talk about with our clients to like just speak human to people, because we're all people, right? So whether you're trying to engage with somebody on LinkedIn or send a cold email, just because you're using an electronic medium doesn't mean you change the way you interact with that human on the other side. Like if I was in a conference and I saw somebody in a room or they came by the booth, I wouldn't have some like cold, weird, stoic template. I'd probably say like, hey, what brings you to the conference? Or they say, hey, what do you do? Like, well, look, I don't know if you have this challenge, but this is the things that we're working on. It's a much more human conversation. And I think we fall into batch and blast and like, oh, we got to reach 1,000 prospects today.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. When you add the pressure of needing to close and get approval, because that's really what sales is. You need to get approval from this person. When you add that pressure, it makes us do really weird, irrational things.
Well, that's the thing. Like they seem rational on the surface, and I think this is the downside of having this tremendous tech stack in our sales and marketing world now. There's like literally thousands of different apps that are all designed to solve different problems within the sales and marketing function. And it's like, oh, I can just send out this cadence of emails. I can just click set and go. Or I can, have somebody connect and sell. Somebody can just like ring a number for me and I just pick up and start talking. And it seems logical on the surface because, like, again, most of the people, especially in the startup world, they're technical people. Like they think like an engineer, think like a product person. So we're going to take an engineering or product approach to sales. It seems logical to just go deploy these apps and platforms. But it's actually the opposite. It's actually irrational to do it that way when you position it the way that you just did, Jason.
You bring up another just such a good point there, and a little hack, because there's so much automation, is the first time you do some of this type of outreach, run the cadence manually. And we forced ourselves to do that with email copy, because what we found out is that first email sounded really good, but if that second email gets sent out and you don't have to click send, it's out of sight, out of mind. When you see that follow-up pop up in whatever sales engagement platform you're using and you have to click send, things completely change, because you're like, that just doesn't, I would not say that. And you start changing it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people approach writing out cadences like, I'm going to write all 6 emails in this cadence out at once, back to back to back. And they're not thinking, well, if I had to send this individually, what would I do? And you got to mirror that language. It should be the same exact language. So giving yourself a different context and having to manually push it through before you start to automate stuff is going to help you get the language a little more conversational.
Yeah, and I think that falls into that personalization bucket as well, and the why part, you in reply, because if you're mapping out that 6 email cadence on a Monday morning, okay, we're going to hit send and send these to all of our new leads or all the people we're doing outbound on, then it's not personalized and it's not about the prospect who replies back to email, number one. But like you said, like you have to hit send. It does trigger a different layer of approval, and it forces personalization. It forces you to double check, like, okay, if I send email number 2, is it really about that person? Is it really personalized? And I think by running, my experience has been by doing the manual cadences enough times, then you can figure out where to automate. But if you try to automate first, then you're just firing bullets hoping that something works.
Yeah. Yep.
So the one place we haven't talked about yet, we talked about a lot about results, empathy, personalization. We just talked about you a little bit. I want to talk more about that in a moment. You mentioned laser focus, and you mentioned that emails should be about no more than 120 words, 3 to 5 sentences. Cold call should be 30 seconds. Videos 60 to 90 seconds. What about 120 words is a magic kind of threshold in your opinion?
Well, 120 words seems to be about the length of an email that's 3 to 5 sentences long. And I'm mostly looking at data from SalesLoft. So SalesLoft has so much data on cadences. I mean, they have millions of data points. And I always like making decisions based on data and looking at, hey, what's the average length of emails that get the highest response rates? And they said something, I think, around 120 or 130 words. And I started looking at that and it's like, well, if you really wanted to take out the fluff, you'd make it under 120. And it's so different than, if you're writing a book or a blog post, the first time you edit it, you probably should try to cut it down by a third to a half. And in our emails, we have that same opportunity. So the 120 words, to answer your question, is what I see in a lot of the data around cadences. And that's primarily what we're emulating.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. I've seen similar data from Outreach, which is a SalesLoft competitor. I went to their conference last year and they did some presentations, and I think their number is like 125.
Yep.
So I did an email for my marketing list about doing a 125 word email, and the email itself was 125 words.
That's cool.
And it worked out pretty well. But it's a really good forcing function, because it's like character limit on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's like, or even on LinkedIn, a LinkedIn post, they give you 300, or like a LinkedIn invite request, I think is 300 characters or whatever it is. I don't know exactly, but it then forces you, like you said, to like chop out fluff. Like, what's really important here? And how do I get really succinct with the messaging in order to make sure, do I cover result and empathy and my personal and my focus, and is it about you, and doing so in a way that catches somebody's attention?
Yeah, there's 2 tools that you might check out. One's called Pro Writing Aid, and the other is Grammarly. Grammarly is probably the more commercialized, popular version of Pro Writing Aid. Mm-hmm. But what I like about Pro Writing Aid over Grammarly is it'll give you a lot more of those types of feedback around being more concise, and it'll literally highlight stuff that's 4 words long and suggest 1 word that you can use. So I would just get in the habit of, like, whenever you're writing email copy, and then use their Chrome extension, obviously, too, when you're writing emails. But it's literally going to help you correct a lot of this stuff to be more concise, because it's tough. The other thing that you can do, too, is read more of your stuff out loud. What Sarah and I have started doing is, when we go to write a cold email sequence, we actually talk it out loud first and think about how we would say it if we're doing a cold call or sending a personalized video. And we had to talk it out. And if you can match that language as much as possible, which is very hard, because most of us are not, like, I don't consider myself a writer, you know what I mean? So it's like my writing chops are maybe a 7 out of 10, but my prospecting chops, I feel like, are, an 8 or a 9. So it's like I can prospect better than I can write. And I think a lot of us are in a situation where we're not really strong writers and don't count on being like this really strong writer. Like, use these tools to help you be more concise, and it'll train you, just like anything else, to be more concise.
Well, and even if you are a good writer, this kind of writing is very different.
Oh, it's so different.
Writing a blog post. I mean, I've written 3 books. I'm working on a 4th right now. Like, I can fill pages. I can do a 2,000 word blog post and love it, right? But writing a 2,000 word blog post, there's no character limit to it. I can write as long as I want, and then hit click publish. Versus saying I have this constraint of 120 words. It's got to be targeted. It's got to have some empathy. It's got to mention a result. Those 3 to 5 sentences, they need to be really, really, like, there can't be a single word in there that's a throwaway word. And so the 30 seconds on the cold call, I like how you talked about reading it out loud, because the messaging, again, like talking about speaking human, if it's an email and you read it out loud and it sounds like an email as opposed to almost the same script that you could use in an actual phone call, then maybe that tells you that there's some dissonance in what you're trying to say and what the prospect needs to see in that email.
Yep. Agreed.
Let's talk about video, because you mentioned this, and this is something else that I've seen. I've been using more video. We did a whole session in our most recent client event that we host 3 times a year around video and how to use it, in particular on the top of the funnel. It's like a trend because there's apps like Vidyard, BombBomb. I think Wistia has got one called Soapbox.
Yep.
Maybe just sort of talk about your experience, what kind of results your clients are getting. Like, how do you use video? How do you overcome the fear of like, I don't even like to write. Now you want me to get on and record a 60-second video for people? I'd just love to get your perspective on the video side of prospecting.
Yeah, video is really powerful because it gives the prospect a chance to empathize with you because they can see that you're a human, right? And it's how I got on, like I just wrote a big LinkedIn post about, how I got on over 30 of the top sales podcasts by cold emailing them with video. So we not only practice what we preach on that end, but with our clients, it can sometimes, if you do it correct, it could, you could double the response rate using video. Like one of our clients got a meeting with the Los Angeles Dodgers using video. You know what I mean? So it works really well, but it's not some magic trick where you can just send anything in that video and the email copy can say anything. And the fact that you did a personalized video like means so much. It definitely doesn't work like that. So there's a couple of things that I would think about. If you're intimidated by sending out a video, you're not alone. I understand why it might be fearful and that you're kind of doing something that makes you uncomfortable, and then also cold prospecting to someone that doesn't know you, and that's an opportunity for them to maybe judge you a little bit. But it's like anything else in sales, a lot of it's repetition. So the first 50 to 100 you do, you're probably going to feel really uncomfortable. And now I've done thousands at this time, and it's very, I don't even think twice about it. So repetition, just kind of push past the fear and know that it's about getting your reps in. So in terms of how to use video, well, I guess when to use videos is probably more appropriate. The way that I look at it is in 2 different ways. You can lead with a video in that very first outreach, but the risk that you are taking is that it could be a bad email address and that email doesn't go through and you spend all this time personalizing it. So the way that we segmentation is such an underrated thing, by the way, in prospecting, is I would say, hey, here are all the types of clients I want to reach out to, and here's like a dream client profile, or here are the logos, the Fortune 500 companies that I really want to work with, and you're going to do extra stuff just for them. So you might lead with a video. The reason why I sent you a video to get on the podcast is that there's a finite number of podcasts. I need to leave like a really good first impression. So segmentation's big. So you can either lead with that video in that first email, or a lot of times what we're doing if we're prospecting is we're doing what I call following the engagement. So your sales engagement platform, outreach, let's say you can create triggers and say, because I always like sending emails to people before I call them or before I send a video. Because then I can say, hey, if I send 100 emails in a week and I have a 50% open rate, maybe 10 out of those 15 are opening the email a bunch of times. And those are the people that I'm going to take the time to send a video to and do some calling with, etc. So I'm not treating prospects equally. So that's another way that you can use video, is in those 2 situations. In terms of what to include in the video and like the content's going to be very similar to what I would say earlier, where, hey Scott, want to send over a quick video to you, personalization. Reason I was reaching out is because I noticed this and this. Lead with empathy, and then talk about the result, and then a call to action to see if they want to chat further, right? So it follows the same exact structure. That's one type of video that you can do that works really well. The other type of video we've been playing around with a lot too that's been working is if you can demo part of your product or how you would demo out maybe your service offering in 60 seconds and get really laser specific on a particular pain point, there's some magic that can happen there too. So for example, before I share an article that I wrote for development teams at nonprofits on how they can save 3 to 5 hours a week going after corporate partners, basically what I'm doing is just outlining our process of how we'd create systems for list building and tools they could use, etc. Before I share that article, I send a 60-second video to them that's like a screen share of me just quickly walking through some of the highlights of that. And I say, hey, wasn't sure if you're having these challenges or not, but this is what I hear from a lot of development teams. I wanted to show you real quick There's this tool, Apollo, that you can use, because I hear that finding email addresses is really hard. It's actually a free tool you can sign up for. Here's what the process flow looks like that to get it into an email. And this might help you out. Can I send over the rest of the article to you? And like that gets a lot of views, and they email it around and that sort of thing. So you can demo out, even if you're selling a service, you could demo out kind of portions of how you might be helping. And it's the whole showing and not telling thing. You're showing them what they could learn from you or how you could help them versus just saying we're the best at this and here's how we can help you. Yeah, so I would say those are the different scenarios that we have used video and seen a good amount of success with.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts here, maybe just to keep on this. I really love the idea of showing like a portion of the product. And so you said using Screenshare. What Screenshare software do you use?
I use Vidyard. Yeah, so instead of doing the camera view, I just do the screen view. Yep.
Okay, got it. I've used Loom, Loom.
Loom's a great one too.
Yeah, Loom's a good one. I used to use, I think it was called Jing, which was a TechSmith product. I'm not sure. I haven't used it in a long time. But I like that idea that when I've used Loom, and I'm not sure if Vidyard does this, but Loom, you can have the video of you in the corner, and then the screen is the screenshot. So that's pretty cool, because then you get both the value of the personalization, like they see you talking, and then you can show portions of the product. The second thing that you said, and this is probably intentional, and I think it's really important to highlight, is you said, can I send you the article?
Yep.
And I was wondering if I think I know, but I want to hear you talk about why did you phrase it that way? Can I send you the rest of the article?
I'm a really big fan of Upfront Contracts. It's like Sandler selling. They talk about UFCs, right? So it's the same principle in cold calling where you're like, hey, Scott, totally caught you on a cold call here, but if you give me 30 seconds, would love to tell you some ideas around how we might be able to help you with this. And then at the end of that, you can tell me whether or not you want to talk. Does that sound fair? You're giving the person an option and to say yes and to opt in to something further from you. So like a lot of our email call to actions and video call to actions will be, can I send over a few times to chat? Or can I send over some ideas? Cool if I send something your way, like things like that. And it's just showing a courtesy to the other person. I don't know, like there's some psychology there that's going on where even they looked at double opt-in landing pages, where you have to click a button and then the sign-up form pops up. Like those oftentimes perform better than if the sign-up box is right there. There's something about getting the person to say yes and like to actually do something that just makes them so much more receptive. I don't know exactly what's going on, but it works really well.
Yeah, you mentioned UFC. The acronym there is Upfront Contract, and the idea, I think it's a filtering mechanism, because again, like thinking about, mentioned the tech stack, right? So one of the tools in the tech stack can be scheduling software, like whether you're using Time Trade or Calendly or whatever. And it's really easy to say, if you want to see a demo, here's my calendar, click to book a time, right? And somebody may choose not, like a large majority of the people will not book a time, but we don't know why they didn't book a time. Did they not book a time because they didn't just want to use a calendar app? Were they not interested? And so by asking them, hey, can I send you a calendar? Would you like to schedule a time? The people that reply, it filters them into a different bucket. Like, they're highly interested because they've gone through these additional hurdles. So it seems counterintuitive because you want to reduce friction and you want to make it easy for people. But what we really want to do when we're prospecting is identify the now people. And the now people don't mind doing the extra step because it's a now thing, as opposed to the rest of the people on the list that aren't replying.
Yeah. It's a really interesting challenge that we have as salespeople now, because you're able to get such high volume in terms of outreach that you really need to kind of sift through where people are showing some sort of interest. And a really easy way to do that is if people are opening up emails or asking a question like this, and it allows you to focus your efforts in a particular area where you're likely to get better results. Like time management, I guess is more of a productivity thing, and just applying the 80-20 rule of where are the lowest hanging fruit opportunities. That's really a new thing that is a skill set now that you need in sales.
Well, look, this has been super useful. So we talked about the reply method, result, empathy, personalization, laser focus. We didn't talk as much about you as them as a hero, but that's okay. Maybe that's good for part 2. What I'd love to do is just kind of give you the floor here, Jason. What can people do? What's the best way for folks that just want to learn more about the reply method? Maybe they just want to get some help. They want to get some of your expertise looking at what they're doing. What's the best way for people to engage with you and learn more about how you can help them?
No, definitely. I would go to blissfulprospecting.com/Scott. I put together a special link for you guys where you can grab a 1-page guide on the reply method, because if you're listening to this, you might be at the gym or driving or whatever. So it's got everything we talked about on one page that you can print out or keep on your desktop. So blissfulprospecting.com/Scott. And then for free, you can get, a lot of the content and just see if you vibe with what we're doing or not. So that's where I would start. And then in terms of how we can help, if you're a rep and you're looking for one-on-one help, we do have 1 or 2 of those spots available usually at any given time. So if you're looking for help on like, well, hey, this sounds cool. How do I apply this? And how do I get more comfortable with cold emails and cold calling? That's something that we can help you with. We work with sales teams as well from a training standpoint and do that same sort of thing. And then if you're a startup or a company that hasn't really done outbound before or hasn't had much success with it, we could come in from a consulting standpoint and really just get the framework there for you and then train you on it so that you guys have a reliable way to go hunting, for business. But just check out our website, blissfulprospecting.com. Tons of free stuff on there, and let us know if you need any help.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo the resources that are available on the website. Like I was, obviously when I was on the site getting ready for our conversation, I downloaded the 1-pager. It's a really, really good resource. It's a kind of resource, like when I saw it, I'm like, this is something that I want to, if I was a sales rep, I'd want to have one of these like sitting on my wall. So as almost like accountability partner for me, like if I'm sending out emails, okay, quick check, I'm about to send out this email. Did I follow REPLY or not? So it's that good of a guide. I think it's really useful. So if you go over to the site, make sure you do grab a copy of that. And the other thing that I really love on your site, which is cool, people should go check out, you've actually taken emails and you've done a review of them and said, okay, this is what's good about this email. This is what's not good about this cold email. And so if you go over to the site, you'll see there's lots of examples that you've just broken down for people. And I've seen some of your LinkedIn posts around this as well. So definitely lots of resources there to give you a sense for your own sanity check. Like, hey, I think I'm doing things well, or maybe I'm not doing things well. What could I do better? Both the combination of this 1-pager plus the stuff that you've got on your site, the resources, I think will really help people get them on the path to doing better.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I appreciate the kind words, Scott.
Yeah. And the site again was blissfulprospecting.com/Scott?
Scott. Yep.
Okay, cool. We'll make sure to add that to the show notes and make sure that people can get a link to that if they need to. Dude, this has been awesome. I'm so glad that you sent me that video to get you on the show.
No, yeah, this is a lot of fun. I don't normally get to be this conversational about stuff. It's usually just like, okay, we're going to talk about the reply method. I'm just talking a ton. So I like that there's some good dialogue back and forth, and we're also able to get into some really good examples.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, man, you got to speak human.
Yep.
Just 2 dudes chatting about sales. So awesome, man. Really good having you on the show. Glad we're able to make it happen. We'll have to do a part 2 at some point soon. And we'll talk soon. All right, Jason. Talk to you soon.
Cool.
All right. That's a wrap. That's my conversation with Jason Bay over at Blissful Prospecting. Absolutely do take advantage of that 1-page download that we just talked about in my conversation with Jason. I have a copy of it myself. I printed it out. I'm looking at it right now. It's absolutely a great resource. It's one of the really effective sales tools that you can have just sitting right there on your desk or next to your desk, posted on your wall, to make sure that every single time that you're doing an outbound or an outreach to a customer, whether it's on a call, in an email, in a video, just following that reply method based on the 1-page document that he's put together, I think that alone will help lift the response rates and the effectiveness that you're getting with your outbound prospecting. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. If you've made it this far to the end of the podcast, it tells me that you're probably digging the content. And so I would really, really, really appreciate it if you could go over to Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you're listening to this podcast, and just leave a review. Tell people what you like about the podcast and tell us how we can make things even better as well. We look at all of those reviews. We take those things really seriously. We want to make this show as effective as possible and as useful as possible for people just like you. So please do leave a review because it helps other people just like you find this podcast. And by the way, if you can think of another company founder, somebody else who's running hard at building out their B2B enterprise startup, then flick them over a link to this episode or to the podcast and say, hey, I've been listening to this podcast. I think it's really good. You should check it out. Love getting listeners, adding more and more people to the number of downloads and listeners and subscribers and all of those great things. Nothing jazzes me more to know that we're able to expand the reach and be able to reach more people with the content that we're providing here on the Startup Selling Show. So that's it for now. That's a wrap. We'll do it again soon. Thanks so much for listening. Scott Sambucci, signing off.